On this edition of Safari Changemakers,
he kind of became really well known when the narrative behind Tuskers really began to take a much more central stage in terms of how rare they are in Africa. So he's been a great ambassador for elephants everywhere, and probably the most photographed elephant on earth.
This is Safari Changemakers. Conversations with Africa's most innovative visionaries, the guardians, pioneers, and trailblazers, offering solutions to the most pressing challenges facing the continent. Over-tourism, human-wildlife conflict, the climate crisis, and environmental degradation. Conversations that reveal bold strategies for sustainable tourism leading to economic opportunities for indigenous communities while protecting local ecosystems and wildlife. Here's your host, founder of Artisans of Safari, recognized by Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast Traveler magazines as one of the top travel specialists for Africa, Karin Jones.
In this edition of Safari Changemakers on location, I'm here at Amboseli in Kenya, and I'm going to be speaking today with Craig Millar of Big Life Foundation and Rosco Wendover, the CEO of Angama Amboseli. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Craig, the elephant who recently passed away, as well as learn all about the conservation and community efforts here. What makes Amboseli different, and why is it such a critical place to get right?
Amboseli is special because it's nestled between other ecosystems, really. It kind of functions as a fulcrum between Kilimanjaro, Chulu, Tsavo, Southwick, and really it represents a link between two enormous ecosystems, the Tsavo ecosystem and the Serengeti, making all of that combined the largest intact savanna ecosystem in Africa. Amboseli is one little piece of that, but is a critical bit that connects all of it. Without Amboseli and the ecosystem itself, those two ecosystems aren't connected. And the same thing applies really to Amboseli itself in a smaller scale. And then if you drill it down even further to where we are now in Kimana Sanctuary, it's a very similar picture where Kimana Sanctuary is a tiny piece in a huge ecosystem, but without Kimana Sanctuary, Amboseli and Tsavo aren't connected. So you go from the tiny scale of Kimana Sanctuary, where we are right now, and the same thing replicates. And really, conservation in Africa, especially around the world, connectivity and habitat is the two most critical things. So at the tiny little microscopic level of Kimana, all the way up to national parks and ecosystems being connected, maintaining connections between them to allow genetic flow, biodiversity, and repopulation by other populations is how we're going to get through the next 30 to 40 years if we want to avoid the next extinction crisis.
I bow to Craig's understanding of the sort of cultural and biodiversity of this region. I suppose from my perspective, Kenya has much to boast about. And you drop down into this confluence of water draining off Kilimanjaro and the Tsavo sort of hills and the Chulu hills. It's a very different type of feel to the traditional sort of well-known Maasai.
Why was this place chosen to build this new camp?
You've got this view of Kilimanjaro, but ultimately it is a place that we wanted to put on the map, and the sense of place, sense of space, sense of people and community and culture.
What kind of responsibility kind of comes with that, with taking on an area like this?
Well, I think from our perspective, there is a responsibility to be guardians of these precious parts of the world.
You talked about with connecting Tsavo and Angama, the Chulus and the Mara. What does that mean?
Even in the most fertile and productive part of the Mara, it's completely dependent on movement. The wildebeest, etc., cannot sustain themselves in one area. They have to be able to move vast distances. And that only increases when you get to dry areas like this. Where we are in Kimana is one of the greenest parts. Amboseli is another part of it. very green, full of water. But the vast majority of this ecosystem is semi-arid or to desert. And in order for wildlife to sustain themselves and people in their livestock, they have to be able to move huge distances. So just for one individual animal to survive, they need huge areas to be able to move. When rain falls in one area, they need to be able to reach there, and sometimes that's 100, 200 kilometers away. So you can start at the really small scale at Kilimanjaro Sanctuary, where one lion, in order for a male to then find a new pride and a new area, has to be able to move out of Kilimanjaro Sanctuary. It's got to be connected to the next adjacent area, which could be 2-3 kilometers away.
What would stop it from being able to just move? I mean, it's humans, right?
Humans, yeah. Fencing, farming,
right. Roads,
railways, etc. So in some places it's like Kilimanjaro is an example of a 40 to 50 meter wide corridor that connects 1 million acres that way and 1 million acres that way, and 1 million acres connect to other areas.
What's a typical day in your life, Craig? With Bigland?
Yeah, well, one of the great things about it is there isn't really a typical day. It's getting a little bit more.
This is your office.
It can be. Some days it is just an office, and some days it isn't. Sometimes it's an airplane. But yeah, it's not too. In a lot of cases, it's not too dissimilar to a normal job. There's paperwork and admin and HR and all of that stuff to deal with, the financing side and budgeting. So you can't get away from that. But then you're very fortunate in being able to. This morning I was flying with the Kenya Wildlife Service warden looking for elephant in a particular area where we know that they can cause problems. And that's a joy to be able to wake up in the morning and get in an airplane and fly around this beautiful ecosystem looking for wildlife. Is exactly why I do the job. And of course there are some dark days as well where poaching happening or Craig, the elephant, dying a week or so ago. So you take the up.
I know it's a huge loss. Can you tell us about Craig?
He kind of became really well known when the narrative behind Tuskers really began to take a much more central stage in terms of how rare they are in Africa. So he's been a great ambassador for elephants everywhere, and amazing for Amboseli. Probably the most photographed elephant on earth. Every tourist in Amboseli would try and find him, and he was very easy to find, which is what made him really special. He was unbelievably calm and tolerant, and would come and say hello to cars and people, which and in all the last 10 years or so, we haven't had really any serious incident of him being aggressive, and that's quite unusual in general. Although I would say Amboseli elephants are incredibly calm, as I'm sure you've experienced as being here. He was a very special elephant because of his character and what he did for elephants in general. But there are a lot that preceded him, Tim and Tolstoy and many others, Dionysius, etc. There've been many before him, and there will be more after him. One of the most incredible things about this particular system, Amboseli and Savo, is by far and away the highest concentration of big tuskers in Africa. So the good news is him and Tolstoy have done an excellent job of spreading their genes, and there are a lot of young elephants that are going to match or possibly exceed those elephants in terms of charisma. And you met one earlier today, TJ, is one of those up and comers. He's only in his early 30s. He's going to be absolutely huge. And again, it's a very calm, friendly elephant, but it's really, he knows exactly, elephants like Craig and Tim have taught him where is safe, where isn't, where you need to be a little bit more wary of people and where you shouldn't. So they're all really equally special, and I'm in a fortunate position to know a lot of them. 9 or 10 in this ecosystem now, after the loss of Craig, but not all of them are easily found. And that's that kind of uniqueness of Craig is that he was calm, easy to find, and big.
How big were his tusks?
One weighed 143 pounds and the other one 128 pounds. So, absolutely massive.
And they
touched the ground.
They touched the ground.
They touched the ground.
Yeah.
There was Tim, very similar to Craig, and they spent quite a lot of time together. Was substantially bigger than him, but wasn't quite as well known because he moved a lot more. Both Tim and Craig, this is their part of their home race. This corridor is their lifeline. But Tim, for example, would probably spend 70% away from Amboseli, whereas Craig spent 70% of his time in and around Amboseli. Very different elephants, but equally charismatic for different reasons. And yeah, like I said, the good news is we've got TJ, Michael, and plenty of others that are going to follow in their footsteps and hopefully bring as much attention and education to their challenges and their plight as Craig did.
My understanding is that there has been a few, maybe one or two giant tuskers that crossed over into Tanzania and were shot by trophy hunters.
We know of for sure 2, possibly 4 that were shot in 2024. Historically, there's been a moratorium or an understanding between Kenya and Tanzania that elephants that cross the boundary are not to be touched. That disappeared. We don't know how, whether it was ever official or not. But since 2024, Tanzania have stopped issuing licenses for these areas along the boundary.
I would say, because Craig's too humble to talk to this really, but the incredible takeaway from the dynasty of Craig is that he died a natural death. In a sanctuary that was his home. And the street value of ivory on Craig, roughly, in China,
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Probably talking $250,000 value.
Yeah. Okay.
And so to really speak to what the Big Life Foundation and work does to generate the awareness and have the wherewithal to manage such huge spaces with such vulnerable, because of the value in such a low GDP countries, it is extraordinary. So the fact that Craig, that is a shining light that says there will be more Craigs, and this model is working. And Craig was telling me this morning that basically he didn't have teeth and therefore couldn't digest the grasslands, and the bark therefore gave him a twisted gut, and he died. That in itself.
That's normal.
That is in
Death
itself.
for
Yeah.
an elephant.
That is success from a very vulnerable species.
They have 6 sets of teeth, which means that they live around 60 years.
50 to 60.
Yeah.
And Craig personally is an unbelievable elephant guy. And I think that, just the nuance this morning of saying if we'd had a lot of grass with a lot of rain, he would have had another season. And he would have just been able to, wouldn't have to digest the grass.
Why do you believe that safari done properly still has the power to change lives?
Being in these unbelievably romantic, beautiful, natural spaces allows you to connect with yourself. And ultimately, the whole world, as I see it, is reasonably simple. The human species wants to connect with other, we're a cooperative society species. We want to be together, but we want as well to understand ourselves and be more aware of where we are in the planet and in ourselves. It really, I genuinely believe that having time with those you love and with those that you connect with, and seeing more parts of the planet that allow you to understand more about yourself and more about your use of time and priorities and what's really valuable to you, I think is an enormous privilege. And that in itself, is the value of travel in these parts of the world, which I think is genuinely life-changing.
More Safari Changemakers after this.
Safari Changemakers is brought to you by Artisans of Safari. Beyond the map lies adventure. With nearly 40 years guiding travelers into Africa's hidden sanctuaries, we craft journeys as individual as your fingerprint. Expertly designed, deeply personal. Connect with Karin at artisansofsafari.com for your collaborative consultation. Your safari, your story. Artisans of Safari.
Now, here in Amboseli, we're on a private conservancy. In Angama also has a lodge in the Mara, right, in the reserve. You probably have some big challenges there, I would think, because it seems so crowded there.
That's a great question, and I love the fact that you kind of want to genuinely ask that. It's funny because the PR around the Great Migration, which is phenomenal, it's a breath migration period, you get this incredible variation and change in the seasons and in therefore how the animals behave and how the interactions are and lower footprint. So I suppose I would always I would say the migration is always, but I would advocate always for those months of the year outside of the migration where, post rains, lush grass, lots of birthing, you get just very magical experiences which perhaps are more personal and more unique, not than the migration, but than people believe they are. So yeah, I would explore the year in a view.
So beyond July and August.
I mean, we're seeing bumper. January is a big month of travel, some South American travel and sort of generative travel in terms of generational travel. Sorry, and for all the reasons that your post rains, it's beautifully lush, it's low footprint. You've got all of the wonderful weather that you would want and hope for in a holiday. If you've got a small amount of time to travel, and you see very different sides of this unbelievable continent. So my only sort of, I suppose, push would be to say, the migration is wonderful, but outside of the migration is just as wonderful in different ways. And to see, the bird life, the birthing seasons, the lush generative, and also the dry seasons, which brings out a very different viewing type and animal behaviour, greater, sort of tusker migrations. It's magical, most of the year. And so that would be my recommendation.
So we don't just need to send clients here basically July and August. We can do.
No, I think there's I think there's a much more. Sorry.
Personally, I prefer other months, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
If I could choose, I'd choose October or January. It's great.
Which is where we are right
now. Yeah, so many and different areas for different times of year. I would say the onus of that responsibility does not necessarily rest on travel planners or even business operators. It's on the management themselves to figure out their job to ensure impact is minimised on wildlife and biodiversity. And we talk about cranes, the gorillas, we talk about cheetah in the Mara, etc. It is becoming a major issue, but it's the conservationists that need to figure out what level of impact is tolerable and how to manage that. And of course, that includes education and awareness, informing people like you and Rosco on how the different aspects of it and how to behave properly, essentially. And from there, rely on people like you to make sure that message spreads that it isn't just July and August. And if you're going to go in July and August, make sure you come back next year in January. Visit again.
And do you work with your guides?
For example, in Angama, that this is part of what we worked on together. Is how many rooms are there? How many vehicles are allowed?
Yeah.
What are those vehicles allowed to do at what time? Where is avoidable? And then even further than that is we secured this space with just a purely conservation was our focus. And when Angama came on board after a year or two, and we successfully got lion back in here and cheetah back in here, the guides noticed that where rangers walked, the lions were avoiding and were hiding. So it's a great example of tourism helping conservation get better and conservation helping other ways. So we changed our patrol pattern, and suddenly lion sightings and cheetah sightings boomed because the lions here are intelligent enough to figure out people on foot, dangerous, people in vehicles, tourist, fine.
Yeah.
So it's constant back and forth, and even in places like Kimana, where you are private and it's a low footprint, there's still the onus on the guides, especially, but the managers at all the different levels to figure out what's the best way to compromise to ensure you're delivering that guest experience but not compromising wildlife security and their livelihoods and welfare.
Yeah, and I mean the planning that you did, as you said, in deciding how many rooms, how many vehicles, and then probably even when you come to a sighting, how long do you stay?
How close?
How close do you get? When more vehicles come, then do you move on?
And that'll probably be the bigger onus, I think, on the likes of Angama and travel planners to educate the guests themselves that this is a necessary step. It might impact your enjoyment of that experience to a degree, but that's why Kilimanjaro Sanctuary and Angama Amboseli is an option. Add that to your itinerary. But understand that it's for the cheetah's livelihood, that you only had half an hour with it. And those guests behind you also deserve half an hour with it.
Tell us about the programs that are in place and how it affects the local community here.
There's a huge, wide variety of programs, really, and a good example here in Amboseli and Angama specifically is you're very much trying to take it kind of piecemeal and make sure that the business is sustainable, is sustaining the product on which it relies. So it's Angama Amboseli directly. Two biggest factors it pays for are wildlife security as a whole, so managing human-wildlife conflict, but anti-poaching and ensuring the wildlife are safe. And that's a huge variety of different things. There's compensation for predation, there's fencing that keeps elephants out of farms, there's drone units that help protect the farms from the elephants and monitor them, and there's actual what people believe is anti-poaching.
Poacher dogs?
Yeah, anti-poaching dogs, there's the aircraft, there's vehicles, a huge variety of things just within that department of big life. Going back again to what landowners see, the single biggest thing and the single biggest use of Angama's resources is paying landowners a fair rate for what they are giving us, essentially. And one of the things we hold up as a great model is the fact that Kilimanjaro Sanctuary is the highest paying per acre conservancy in the ecosystem, and is in fact only second to the Masai Mara in Kenya. We hope to beat them in a few years. We've got some work to do on that front, but those two things in combination are the foundational layer of making sure Kilimanjaro Sanctuary and this corridor stay open. But there's other layers to it of education, scholarships that both Angama and Big Life provide to landowners' children. There's health insurance offered by Angama for landowners. Medical, there's a lot of medical assistance that goes into the communities, and that's one of the things we were discussing earlier this morning. So the list really is quite wide and broad, but the foundation is those two. Wildlife is safe, the habitat's secure, and the people see the value in it, and that ensures you can build on education and elsewhere. And then of course on top of that, you make sure that the business is producing direct benefits, it's sourcing locally when it can. I'll leave Rosco to talk a bit more about that, but the jobs, of course, are the important part, that are an additional benefit. So the rangers are all members of this, they're landowners, and same with Angama and their employees here.
Our local people here.
From the membership, not 100%, but with an agreed upon amount to start and grow, and that was part of our negotiation as we started. And those offer exactly what you talked about, is what kind of future is there. Tourism and conservation is an industry like any other, and what I've just described is drivers, pilots, mechanics, drone operators, radio operators, fence checkers, builders, and then the plethora of different types of jobs that you can get within tourism, and that builds a future for the children that some of whom we're helping to educate.
I joined this business specifically because the very wonderful founders and the board of Angama, Nick Fitzgerald, Steve Fitzgerald, and really the ethos of the business is it's a genuine sense of people in space. So 100% of our lodges are Kenyans, and over 85% of each lodge is recruited from the community it exists in. Now the GMs might move from here to Amboseli and Morristown. If you look at the journeys of both our very amazing general managers, and I was the general manager in luxury hospitality lodge in Madagascar, and these guys are significantly better than I was. But if you look at the kind of and your final part of your question was really interesting. What is the future of young children in these communities? Now, it's the future. General manager of one of the best lodge operations in the world. That is a genuine roadmap.
Yeah.
And so, as Craig talks to, this idea of every staff member that you speak to here lives and breathes this part of the planet. And so when you take time to speak to our staff, you get these incredible stories of actually the challenges of how do I pay the dowry to marry the woman that I've fallen in love with, and how do I, where do I get the cash for that cow from to pay the father-in-law, and where do I, how do I get my grandparents to understand that my children need to go to school, not go and just look after the livestock as traditional Maasai, which is a very important cultural heritage to maintain, but there is a balance now that says, well, there is a schools available, there is funding, and there is there's opportunity for good schooling, good jobs, and really for that overlap of culture which we want to celebrate with commercial opportunity to improve the opportunity for children, not least medical and education. And so it's a really genuine story that says, if you want a sense of space, speak to the people who've grown up there. Salash, one of our guides here, was a ranger with Big Life, who was on the David Attenborough series of Planet Earth. That, as a ranger that gets called out, didn't even know he was on it. He's a world famous, star, but is now a guide that will tell you, well, when I was a child, in this right here, this is what I saw. Then I was a ranger, and I started to understand actually that the elephants attacking the crops was something we needed to help, not just retaliate to. Now I'm a guide that celebrates that on the international stage, and it's so for these pockets of the world, the opportunity for children to either go into the sort of very beautiful cultural sort of sense of family and sense of belonging that the Maasai culture is all about, and or education, balance, learning language skills, learning hospitality, meeting guests, and talking their stories. And that's the most powerful part of this industry, is storytelling. And it's something that our founders are just, it's in their DNA, and it's why I joined the business, and I'm so incredibly proud to be part of the story. So, yeah.
And I bet you spend time also out there talking to the landowners and
All the time. Yeah, without it, you're completely done. Really, it's got to be completely. It's one of the hardest parts, the most challenging, but also most rewarding parts of the job, is getting that sense of collective and understanding. This is where we all want to get to. Because in the end, people don't really want different things. But how do we get there, and how do we marry that thought process with this one and get it all together? And it's about offering that real sense of ownership and purpose. Not just on the land they own, but the wildlife that passes through it, which technically, of course, belongs to the government, but there's a real sense of understanding in Amboseli, and Craig's a good example, and Salash, the ranger turned guide, are two great candidates to speak to that, where they explain how life can change and people can achieve what they've wanted to over decades through people all working together and understanding that objective is achievable through different ways, but we've all got to come together to get there.
thank you. I know we could talk about this for a long time, but I'm sure you have to get back to your yellow aircraft and fly away up into the sky and see it all from up there. And Rosco, I don't know if you have to head back to Nairobi or what you're doing, so thank you.
Well, thank you, and finally, just thank you that you guys make this happen, and this self-fulfilling spiral of guests having a good time in this incredible continent allows us to make it a better place, which improves the guest experience. It only gets better. So because of you, we are we, and let's come see. But also, we're very, very grateful for everyone, particularly from as far as you guys have travelled to where you've got so much on your doorstep, and you come a long way. And I would challenge anyone to say, come here and don't leave a slightly more learned person, better sense of self-awareness and self-satisfaction, and really prioritising your own true values. And that's kind of all we can ask for, I suppose. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's our show for today. Subscribe on YouTube and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time, I'm Karin Jones.